I've earned 30 plus certifications, and I'm here to guide you to success on your exam. Welcome to the Ultimate AZ-104 Exam Masterclass. Are you ready to crack the AZ-104 exam in one go? You're in the right place. In this session, we'll arm you with powerful insights and hand-picked questions that can make all the difference in your exam performance. We've scanned the web using intelligent crawlers to gather the most critical and high-impact questions, all compiled into one powerful PDF resource. You can download it from the link in the description. Not only will we explore these must-practice questions, but we'll also share real exam experiences and pro tips to give you that competitive edge. Let's dive into the key questions that could shape your success. Question 1. Your company has several departments. Each department has a number of virtual machines, VMs. The company has an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1. All VMs are located in RG1. You want to associate each VM with its respective department. What should you do? A. Create Azure management groups for each department. B. Create a resource group for each department. C. Assign tags to the virtual machines. D. Modify the settings of the virtual machines. Correct answer, C. Assign tags to the virtual machines. Explanation. Azure tags allow you to logically categorize resources like VMs by department without changing resource groups, subscriptions, or management structure. Question 2. You are planning to deploy an Ubuntu server virtual machine to your company's Azure subscription. You are required to implement a custom deployment that includes adding a particular Trusted Root Certification Authority, CA. Which of the following should you use to create the virtual machine? A. The new Azure RMVM Complete. B. The new AZ-VM Complete. C. The Create AZ-VM Complete. D. The AZ-VM Create command. Correct answer D. The AZ-VM Create command. Explanation. The Azure CLI supports Cloud Init and custom data, allowing Trusted Root CA certificates to be added during Ubuntu VM deployment. Question 3. Your company has 3 virtual machines, VMs, that are included in an availability set. You try to resize one of the VMs, which returns an allocation failure message. It is imperative that the VM is resized. Which of the following actions should you take? A. You should only stop one of the VMs. B. You should stop 2 of the VMs. C. You should stop all 3 VMs. D. You should remove the necessary VM from the availability set. Correct answer, C. You should stop all 3 VMs. Explanation. VMs in an availability set share fault and update domains. To resize one VM, all VMs in the availability set must be stopped. Question 4. You have an Azure Virtual Machine VM that has a single data disk. You have been tasked with attaching this data disk to another Azure VM. You need to make sure that your strategy allows for the virtual machines to be offline for the least amount of time possible. Which of the following is the action you should take first? A. Stop the VM that includes the data disk. B. Stop the VM that the data disk must be attached to. C. Detach the data disk. D. Delete the VM that includes the data disk. Correct answer A. Stop the VM that includes the data disk. Explanation. Azure requires a VM to be stopped, deallocated, before detaching a data disk, making this the first necessary step. Question 5. Note: the question is included in a number of questions that depicts the identical setup. However, every question has a distinctive result. Establish if the solution satisfies the requirements. Your company has a Microsoft SQL Server always-on availability group configured on their Azure Virtual Machines, VMs. You need to configure an Azure internal load balancer as a listener for the availability group. Solution: you create an HTTP health probe on port 1433. Does the solution meet the goal? A. Yes. B. No. Correct answer B. No. Explanation. SQL Always On requires a TCP health probe on a custom probe port, not an HTTP probe on port 1433. Question 6. Note: the question is included in a number of questions that depicts the identical setup. However, every question has a distinctive result. Establish if the solution satisfies the requirements. Your company has a Microsoft SQL Server Always On availability group configured on their Azure Virtual Machines, VMs. You need to configure an Azure internal load balancer as a listener for the availability group. Solution: you set session persistence to client IP. Does the solution meet the goal? A. Yes. B. No. Correct answer A. Yes. Explanation. Session persistence set to client IP is required for SQL Server Always On to ensure consistent client connections. Question 7. Note: the question is included in a number of questions that depicts the identical setup. However, every question has a distinctive result. Establish if the solution satisfies the requirements. Your company has a Microsoft SQL Server Always On availability group configured on their Azure Virtual Machines, VMs. You need to configure an Azure internal load balancer as a listener for the availability group. Solution: you enable floating IP. Does the solution meet the goal? A. Yes. B. No. Correct answer A. Yes. Explanation. Floating IP, direct server return, is required for SQL Always On listeners to function correctly with Azure load balancers. Question 8. Your company has an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, subscription. You need to deploy 5 virtual machines, VMs, to your company's virtual network subnet. The VMs will each have both a public and private IP address. Inbound and outbound security rules for all of these virtual machines must be identical. Which of the following is the least amount of network interfaces needed for this configuration? A. 5. B. 10. C. 20. D. 40. Correct answer A. 5. Explanation. Each VM requires only one NIC. Public and private IP addresses can both be assigned to a single network interface. Question 9. Your company has an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, subscription. You need to deploy 5 virtual machines, VMs, to your company's virtual network subnet. The VMs will each have both a public and private IP address. Inbound and outbound security rules for all of these virtual machines must be identical. Which of the following is the least amount of security groups needed for this configuration? A. 4. B. 3. C. 2. D. 1. Correct answer D. 1. Explanation. A single network security group can be associated with multiple NICs or subnets when identical inbound and outbound rules are required. Question 10. You have an Azure subscription that contains a standard SKU Azure Container Registry named conreg1. You need to ensure that conreg1 supports georeplication. What should you do first for conreg1? A. Enable admin user. B. Add a scope map. C. Add an automation task. D. Create a cache rule. E. Upgrade the SKU. Correct answer E. Upgrade the SKU. Explanation. Azure Container Registry georeplication is only supported in the premium SKU, so upgrading is required first. Question 11. You administer a solution in Azure that is currently having performance issues. You need to find the cause of the performance issues pertaining to metrics on the Azure infrastructure. Which of the following is the tool you should use? A. Azure Traffic Analytics. B. Azure Monitor. C. Azure Activity Log. D. Azure Advisor. Correct answer B. Azure Monitor. Explanation. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes performance metrics, logs, and alerts, making it ideal for diagnosing infrastructure performance issues. Question 12. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. You have 5 terabytes of data that you need to transfer to Subscription 1. You plan to use an Azure import-export job. What can you use as the destination of the imported data? A. Azure Data Lake Store. B. Azure File Storage. C. Azure SQL Database. D. The Azure File Sync Storage Sync Service. Correct answer B. Azure File Storage. Explanation. Azure import-export jobs support Azure Blob Storage and Azure File Storage as valid destinations for large offline data transfers. Question 13. You have an Azure Active Directory Azure AD tenant that contains 5,000 user accounts. You create a new user account named Admin User 1. You need to assign the user administrator administrative role to Admin User 1. What should you do from the user account properties? A. From the licenses blade, assign a new license. B. From the directory role blade, modify the directory role. C. From the groups blade, invite the user account to a new group. Correct answer B. From the directory role blade, modify the directory role. Explanation. Administrative roles such as user administrator are assigned directly from the directory role settings in Azure AD. Question 14. You have an Azure Active Directory Azure AD tenant named contoso.onmicrosoft.com that contains 100 user accounts. You purchase 10 Azure AD Premium P2 licenses for the tenant. You need to ensure that 10 users can use all the Azure AD Premium features. What should you do? A. From the licenses blade of Azure AD, assign a license. B. From the groups blade of each user, invite the users to a group. C. From the Azure AD domain, add an enterprise application. D. From the directory role blade of each user, modify the directory role. Correct answer A. From the licenses blade of Azure AD, assign a license. Explanation. Azure AD Premium features are enabled per user by assigning Premium P2 licenses to the licenses blade. Question 15. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 and an on-premises deployment of Microsoft System Center Service Manager. Subscription 1 contains a virtual machine named VM1. You need to ensure that an alert is set in Service Manager when the amount of available memory on VM1 is below 10%. What should you do first? A. Create an automation runbook. B. Deploy a function app. C. Deploy the IT Service Management Connector ITSM. D. Create a notification. Correct answer, C. Deploy the IT Service Management Connector ITSM. Explanation. The ITSM connector integrates Azure Monitor alerts with System Center Service Manager, enabling alert creation based on VM metrics. Question 16. You sign up for Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, Premium P2. You need to add a user named, email protected, as an administrator on all the computers that will be joined to the Azure AD domain. What should you configure in Azure AD? A. Device settings from the devices blade. B. Providers from the MFA server blade. C. User settings from the users blade. D. General settings from the groups blade. Correct answer A. Device settings from the devices blade. Explanation. Device settings allow you to define which users are automatically added as local administrators on Azure AD, joined devices. Question 17. You have an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, tenant named contosocloud.onmicrosoft.com. Your company has a public DNS zone for contoso.com. You add contoso.com as a custom domain name to Azure AD. You need to ensure that Azure can verify the domain name. Which type of DNS record should you create? A. MX. B. NCC. C. PTR. D. RSIG. Correct answer A. MX. Explanation. Azure AD verifies domain ownership by checking an MX or TXT record created in the public DNS zone. Question 18. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 that contains an Azure Log Analytics workspace named Workspace 1. You need to view the error events from a table named Event. Which query should you run in Workspace 1? A. Get event, where $_event type == error. B. Search in event error. C. Select asterisk from event where event type == error. D. Search in event asterisk where event type EQ error. Correct answer B. Search in event error. Explanation. The search operator in Custo query language allows quick filtering of records containing the term error in the event table. Question 19. You have an Azure subscription. You have 100 Azure virtual machines. You need to quickly identify underutilized virtual machines that can have their service tier changed to a less expensive offering. Which blade should you use? A. Monitor. B. Advisor. C. Metrics. D. Customer Insights. Correct answer B. Explanation. Advisor. Azure Advisor analyzes resource usage and provides recommendations to reduce costs, including identifying underutilized virtual machines. Question 20. You plan to create an Azure storage account named Storage1 that will contain a file share named Share1. You need to ensure that Share1 can support SMB multi-channel. The solution must minimize costs. How should you configure storage? A. Premium performance with locally redundant storage, LRS. B. Standard performance with zone redundant storage, ZRS. C. Premium performance with geo-redundant storage, GRS. D. Standard performance with locally redundant storage, LRS. Correct answer A. Premium performance with locally redundant storage, LRS. Explanation. SMB multi-channel is supported only on premium Azure files. LRS minimizes cost while meeting the technical requirement. Question 21. You have an Azure subscription that contains a user named User1. You need to ensure that User1 can deploy virtual machines and manage virtual networks. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which role-based access control (RBC) roles should you assign to User1? A. Owner. B. Virtual machine contributor. C. Contributor. D. Virtual machine administrator login. Correct answer C. Contributor. Explanation. The contributor role allows managing virtual machines and virtual networks without granting full ownership or access management permissions. Question 22. You create an app service plan named Plan 1 and an Azure web app named Web App 1. You discover that the option to create a staging slot is unavailable. You need to create a staging slot for Plan 1. What should you do first? A. From Plan 1, scale up the app service plan. B. From Web App 1, modify the application settings. C. From Web App 1, add a custom domain. D. From Plan 1, scale out the app service plan. Correct answer A. From Plan 1, scale up the app service plan. Explanation. Deployment slots are only available in standard or higher app service plans, requiring a scale-up operation first. Question 23. You have an Azure DNS zone named adatum.com. You need to delegate a subdomain named research.adatum.com to a different DNS server in Azure. What should you do? A. Create an NS record named research in the adatum.com zone. B. Create a PTR record named research in the adatum.com zone. C. Modify the SOA record of adatum.com. D. Create an A record named star.research in the adatum.com zone. Correct answer A. Create an NS record named research in the adatum.com zone. Explanation. Delegating a subdomain requires an NS record pointing to the authoritative DNS servers for the subdomain. Question 24. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1 that contains an Azure Log Analytics workspace named Workspace 1. You need to view the error events from a table named Event. Which query should you run in Workspace 1? A. Get event, where $_event type == error. B. Event, search error. C. Select asterisk from event where event type == error. D. Search in event asterisk, where event type EQ error. Correct answer B. Event, search error. Explanation. This KQL query searches the event table for entries containing the word error, returning matching log records. Question 25. You have a registered DNS domain named contoso.com. You create a public Azure DNS zone named contoso.com. You need to ensure that records created in the contoso.com zone are resolvable from the Internet. What should you do? A. Create NS records in contoso.com. B. Modify the SOA record in the DNS domain registrar. C. Create the SOA record in contoso.com. D. Modify the NS records in the DNS domain registrar. Correct answer D. Modify the NS records in the DNS domain registrar. Explanation. For public resolution, the domain registrar must point to Azure DNS name servers using updated NS records. Question 26. You have 3 offices and an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, tenant. You need to grant user management permissions to a local administrator in each office. What should you use? A. Azure AD roles. B. Administrative units. C. Access packages in Azure AD entitlement management. D. Azure roles. Correct answer B. Administrative units. Explanation. Administrative units allow delegating user management permissions to local administrators for specific subsets of users. Question 27. You create an Azure storage account. You plan to add 10 blob containers to the storage account. For one of the containers, you need to use a different key to encrypt data at rest. What should you do before you create the container? A. Generate a shared access signature SAS. B. Modify the minimum TLS version. C. Rotate the access keys. D. Create an encryption scope. Correct answer D. Create an encryption scope. Explanation. Encryption scopes allow different containers within the same storage account to use different encryption keys. Question 28. You have an on-premises server that contains a folder named d:\folder1. You need to copy the contents of d:\folder1 to the public container in an Azure storage account named contoso. Which command should you run? A. AZ storage blob copy start d:\folder1 https://contosodata.blob.core.windows.net/public. B. ASCII sync d:\folder1 https://contosodata.blob.core.windows.net/public snapshot. C. ASCII copy d:\folder1 https://contosodata.blob.core.windows.net/public recursive. D. AZ storage blob copy start batch d:\folder1 https://contosodata.blob.core.windows.net/public. Correct answer, C. ASCII-copy:/folder1 https://contosodata.blob.core.windows.net/public recursive. Explanation. AZ-copy supports recursive uploads from on-premises folders to Azure Blob storage efficiently. Question 29. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. You have 5 terabytes of data that you need to transfer to Subscription 1. You plan to use an Azure import-export job. What can you use as the destination of the imported data? A. An Azure Cosmos DB database. B. Azure File Storage. C. Azure SQL Database. D. A virtual machine. Correct answer B. Azure File Storage. Explanation. Azure Import-Export supports Azure File Storage for importing large datasets using physical disks. Question 30. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. You have 5 terabytes of data that you need to transfer to Subscription 1. You plan to use an Azure import-export job. What can you use as the destination of the imported data? A. Azure Blob Storage. B. Azure Data Lake Store. C. Azure SQL Database. D. A virtual machine. Correct answer A. Azure Blob Storage. Explanation. Azure Blob Storage is a supported target for import-export jobs and is commonly used for large-scale data ingestion. Please revise full PDF 2 to 3 times for 100% success. Check the description for the PDF download link and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for upcoming episodes. Thank you.